Hello and welcome to SIP TV from TrustNet Direct. I'm with Greg McClymont today, who's Head of Retirement at Aberdeen Asset Management, one of Europe's biggest asset managers.
Hello John, it's a pleasure to be here today with you.
Again, another really interesting issue that's arisen from the pension freedoms is, do you go for an income portfolio when you're going into retirement? Because, you know, historically we always talked about lifestyling your portfolio. So you went for a very aggressive, then sort of began to go into wealth preservation and then income. And now that's potentially not the case anymore in retirement. And there is an argument to say you can go into retirement with a growth portfolio. So, Greg, what's your sense of how people can take the new rules or the new freedoms and to give them, you know, some more options, I suppose?
Yes, of course, it used to be quite straightforward for most people. I had growth phase early on in the savings cycle, the consolidation phase, and then towards retirement, de-risked with a view to buying an annuity. So went very heavy into gilts to allow that matching with an annuity purchase. But of course, the freedoms mean that no one any longer has to buy an annuity, and that creates significantly more options. But with those responsibilities, there are, of course, challenges. With those freedoms, responsibility to make that income last throughout retirement, if one's not wishing to buy an annuity, is a real challenge as well as an opportunity. The way I would describe it is to say that every individual will be different. Risk appetite, very important. Risk tolerance, capacity to accept losses, all those things must be considered on an individual level. Individuals are, by definition, different. And I think anyone considering remaining invested throughout retirement and drawing an income from those investments has to think very carefully about what their income needs are, what their capital preservation needs are, more widely, what other assets does an individual possess, and in that context then come to a conclusion about the right mixture of investments. The spectrum is pretty straightforward. From one end, annuities, in a variety of form of annuities, through to some kinds of guarantees which protect on the downside, but perhaps in a upside market don't offer the same reward, through to full exposure, say, to equities. Now, I think pot size matters, because those questions I've posed, the size of pot will impinge upon the answers. So bluntly, if you have a very big pot, then you can probably afford to take a bit more risk because you have the capacity to absorb some loss and ride out the down periods. And sequencing risk, of course, is doubly important in retirement, because the issue is if you're cancelling units to provide an income every month or every quarter or every year, and you're having to cancel units in a period of market volatility, then the danger is that it makes it doubly difficult to restore those lost units.
Yeah.
And that's a big issue. So I think those things all have to be taken into account.
I mean, sequencing risk keeps coming up, and it's something that isn't well understood, I think, in the wider market. What can be done to ride out that risk?
Well, diversification, I think, is absolutely critical. Diversification either via blending a number of investment funds together, or having perhaps a single investment fund which is genuinely diversified by your asset manager. That's really the most straightforward way to do it. There's different ways. You can have a growth portfolio with a cash buffer that you draw from the cash buffer rather than from the growth part of the portfolio, so you're not having to take income in a down market, thus crystallising those losses. That's a popular way of doing it. You know, I can see why. There's also an approach which says really have a mixture of protections, guarantees, low volatility protections. I think that's where the market might move in some degrees. Guarantees are expensive. Sequencing risk exists, of course, in accumulation.
Yeah.
When you're building up your savings,
Don't we know it?
Yes, we do indeed. But it's doubly important in retirement because of the income dimension,
Yep.
the drawing in income from your investments regularly in periods of down markets.
Yeah.
How do you manage that without crystallising too much loss?
I mean, some people say that, and it'd be interesting to hear your view on it. You know, people try to set up their drawdown so it pays them a salary. Surely, is it not better just to take it as you need it and try and leave as much of your money invested as you possibly can at all times?
And I think that's a really interesting point, and that takes us into individual preferences.
Yeah.
Because, of course, if you're someone who really thrives on regular, systematic approaches to your income taking, then you can see the attractions of that.
Yeah.
It takes you into the issue of the 25% tax-free lump sum. Very attractive. In Australia, which has had a similar approach to retirement in terms of not having to buy an annuity for a long, long time, the lump sum is enormously important. It's really what people do with their pension pot. They tend to take huge chunks in lump sum, but of course, if you're doing that, it's then reducing your investable assets in drawdown with obvious implications over the long term. So it really will depend on the individual, but clearly the more investable assets you have, the greater the chance of diversification and growth.
Gotcha. Greg, thank you. If you want to do some retirement planning for yourself, we've built some really handy retirement tools covering the 3 stages of retirement: planning, approaching retirement, and post-retirement, and you'll find them all on the TrustNet Direct website.